Today's lesson is going to focus on purposes and origins of government. And we're going to seek to answer the following question. Which historical events, documents, and philosophers influenced American colonists' ideas about government? In other words, the principles that we celebrate today as being a large part of American democracy were not thought up out of nowhere. They were actually inspired by European great thinkers and established by documents that had already established some level of democracy for hundreds of years. Before we start, you should already be able to identify some of the principles of American democracy. Americans are passionate about things like limited government, that individuals that are in positions of authority work for and serve the interests of the people. Justice and equality under the law, and liberty, just to name a few. One of the first documents to inspire the principle of limited government was the Magna Carta. In 1215, English nobles were upset with the oppressive policies of King John, including unfair taxation and cruel treatment of prisoners. They forced him to sign a document known as the Magna Carta, recognizing their rights. Although this document was originally an agreement between nobles and the king, it was later adopted by common people to be a limitation to government as it applied to them as well. Even after signing the Magna Carta, power struggles between the monarchy and parliament persisted for more than 400 years. This power struggle is what eventually led Parliament to remove King James II from the throne with little resistance. King James II was replaced by two new monarchs that recognized Parliament, which is England's lawmaking body, as supreme. What ended up happening is the new monarchy ended up agreeing to less monarchy, more rights and powers to the people. They established the English Bill of Rights in 1689, the next document to inspire American democracy. Let's take a look at some of the rights listed under this document. First, monarchs rule, but with the consent of Parliament, meaning elected representatives of the people. Monarchs need consent of Parliament to raise taxes, maintain an army, or suspend laws. Monarchs can't interfere with elections. People can petition the government and get a speedy trial, and no more cruel and unusual punishment or excessive fines and bail. Check out the Bill of Rights from the U.S. Constitution. Anything here look familiar? Anything align with the English Bill of Rights? Amendment 1 deals with the right to petition the government. Amendments 4 through 7 deal with due process and the right to a fair trial. Amendment 8 deals with protecting against unreasonable fines and cruel and unusual punishment. I definitely see some direct correlation here. Ultimately, what did the English Bill of Rights achieve and what did they increase? Limitations on government. This is precisely the purpose of adding the Bill of Rights to the U.S. Constitution as well. Limits on government, protecting liberty. Now that we've had a chance to talk about some documents that inspired American democracy, it's time to talk about some influencers. In other words, the ideals of great thinkers. The first influencer or great thinker we're going to be talking about first is Sir William Blackstone. Blackstone helped to establish English common law and was very much followed by the founders. Blackstone believed the source of all human law derived from the law of nature and the Bible. And he believed no human laws should contradict these values. Ultimately, what the founders got from Blackstone were ideals centered around the equality of all people and fairness for all people. Now it's time to talk about some great Enlightenment thinkers. Thomas Hobbes argued that societies needed social contracts, meaning that the people gave consent to those who were to govern them. Governments are necessary to create laws and maintain order. Otherwise, humans would create conflict, would not be able to function. The people may have to give up some of their rights, but in exchange, the government provides peace and order. John Locke took this concept of social contract a step further. He specifically named the natural rights of the people to be the right to life, liberty, and property. This later inspired the phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence. Through social contract, these rights are expected to be protected by the government. And if the government failed to protect these rights, then the people had the right to overthrow it, to rebel against it. For Locke, government was legitimate only as long as the people continued to consent to it. The next influencer or Enlightenment thinker we're going to look at is Swiss political theorist Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau promoted freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and direct democracy. His ideals about direct democracy applied specifically to local communities. The people were able to have a say in the laws and the government they were to adhere to. The goal of these local communities is to promote these rights while at the same time establishing law and government. The last Enlightenment thinker we're going to discuss is French philosopher Montesquieu. Montesquieu promoted the importance of separating the powers of government. When we look at the way that we separate the powers of government between three branches in the United States, that was directly inspired by Montesquieu. Montesquieu believed that branches of government would check and balance one another, and that no one branch of government should have too much power. What was the philosophical impact of each of these thinkers on our American government? How comfortable are you in discussing the ideals that each of these thinkers promoted? Most importantly, how do we see the influence of those ideals on the American democracy we enjoy today? Another document we're going to discuss is the Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact was drawn up by the families that anchored the New England coast. The Pilgrims realized that they needed a set of laws to govern themselves if they were going to survive in this new land. They chose their own leaders and they made their own laws. This was definitely an example of democracy. Eventually, all of the colonies established their own charters, setting up their own governments in each of the colonies. The colonial charters are some of the earliest examples of dividing up power between three branches. You have government among the governor, legislative assembly, and the courts. We're going to be looking at why and how the colonists declared independence. When we look at the citizens that made up the colonies, they were regarded as subjects of the king and Great Britain. They did not enjoy the same levels of democracy that were enjoyed by people who lived in Britain. When we look at some of the ideals that were promoted in these documents and among these great thinkers, it's no surprise that the colonists felt as though they were under a tyrannical government's control. When the colonies declared independence from Great Britain, they established the United States, still sovereign, independent states, however. But their justification for declaring independence was based in the ideals that they did not feel applied to them, but believed they should apply to them. The assignment you'll be doing after this presentation will require you to apply some of the ideals that are promoted in these documents and among these great thinkers to the grievances in the Declaration of Independence. Please connect as many grievances as you can to at least 5 of the influences listed here. I will include more specific instructions in Google Classroom. Please be prepared to share some of the connections that you made with the class when we review. This is the end of the first lesson on Foundations of Government.